Hello, everyone, and thank you today for joining us for the latest installment of Going Pro, where we celebrate here at Crime Writers of Canada one of our members publishing their first book or their third short story. Joining me today is Ken MacQueen, author of Hero Haters. Thanks for joining us today, Ken.
My pleasure, Eric.
I've never asked this question before, but I have to ask it today. Ken MacQueen, is that your real name? Because it's the kind of name all crime writers dream of having.
Well, John D. MacDonald was already taken, so what can I say? No, it's the name I was born with and the name I used on my byline for about 40 years. So I thought I'd keep it for my book.
You couldn't have been born with a better name. So your career before becoming a crime writer was that of journalism, and you wrote for Maclean's for many, many years. I was wondering, is there any highlights, any people that you met that you're just like, wow, what a cool person?
Oh, many over the years. I worked in Kitchener, Ontario. That was my first job in daily newspapers, and it was like being given, for a working class kid, it was like being given the keys to the kingdom. Covering even a city council meeting was foreign turf for me, and so all of these familiar names would pop up. I remember once when I looked about 12, and here I was riding in the back of a limo with Bill Davis, who happened to be the Premier of Ontario at the time, asking him what I thought were hard-hitting questions. And Bill Davis was a master of obfuscation, however you say that. Anyway, he would give a run-on sentence that made zero sense, and it was my first experience of dealing with politics. But no, I found it a fascinating thing. I moved to Ottawa then and worked for the Ottawa Citizen, and there I covered Terry Fox, who was a pretty darn interesting fellow. So I was up in Northern Ontario with him about 6 weeks before his run ended. Either that was good or bad timing on my part. I don't know which, but it was certainly a good insight into things. I worked for Southern News, which at the time was a wonderful employer. I remember joining the Southern from Canadian Press, where I'd worked in Ottawa, and they gave me a stack of credit cards like you would not believe, and thought that was another key to the kingdom. So we were able to spend pretty freely. So I traveled a lot in Ottawa, but then also on the U.S. West Coast, I became the Southern East or West Coast correspondent. So everything from Alaska to Mexico was neat. And so I did a ridiculous amount of traveling for that. And from there, I ended up going to Vancouver Sun, and then to Maclean's, where I spent the last 15 years, and it was all wonderful. Another fascinating person that I interviewed, and one of my heroes, as was Terry Fox, was a soldier named Trevor Green, who was a Canadian soldier over during the war in Afghanistan, and he was the fellow who was hit on the head with an axe while he was at a peaceful what he thought was a peaceful meeting. His job was to build bonds between the Canadians and the Taliban, or the Afghani people. Anyway, he was hit on the head with an axe, by all rights, if not for superb medical treatment, would be dead. And also his fellow soldiers mowed down the ambush that started with that attack. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time over the years charting Trevor's just amazing progress as he came back. I mean, he's still wounded, but a remarkable man. And so I think when I look at real heroes, he's got to be one of them. In fact, he went through my book and offered some very good suggestions. And in a soldier's way, he'd say, "Come on, MacQueen, you can do better than this." Yes, boss.
You mentioned having keys to the kingdom, but with those keys, you get to talk to heroes, but you also get to talk to some, let's call them shady characters. So, was there any real baddies you had to interview?
Yeah, well, interview and cover. I spent a lot of time in courtrooms. I tracked the last parole hearing of one horrific serial killer, Clifford Olson.
Mhm.
It turned out to be a total goofball at the end. I think he was probably demented at that point. I covered the Air India trials, although they never really went anywhere. I spent countless hours in courtroom during the Picton hearings and interviewing the shattered families that resulted from that. All of those things take a bit of a toll on you as you talk to these people. But real baddies, I don't know. I like to think that in the main, most of the people I interviewed were the goodies. Those were the stories I preferred to write. I covered things that just still give me chills. The earthquake in San Francisco and things like that. Back then, I could actually charter a jet to fly there. That would never happen in today's environment. But I was very impressed with the people. Another hero, I have to say, from that time was a doctor at the Martin Luther King Medical Center. This was not during the earthquake. This was during the Rodney King riots. And he was the head of the emergency department. I was trying to find an angle that no one else had, which is pretty darn hard when you're in Los Angeles in a media environment like that. But I remembered back in the day, there was a case of 2 years before that, where they were hunting for soldiers that could work in the emergency department. And this guy who was a Vietnam vet, the head of the emergency department, wrote the army and said, look, you're not in a war right now. You need skills in treating penetrating injuries. So he said, why don't you bring soldiers to my emergency ward and they can learn. We've got a war right here in LA that you don't seem to know about. And so I thought 2 years later, I phoned this doctor up in the middle of this chaotic time and talked my way into meeting him during the riots. It was kind of scary even driving into that area.
Wow.
And anyway, I met a fellow named Lieutenant Canfield, who was an Army surgeon who was just exhausted. He'd been working like hours and hours and hours, but we had a great chat and a lot of insight. And the doctor, the head of the emergency department, was a Vietnam vet, and he's a Black man. And as I was interviewing him, I talked about the riot, and he gently corrected me and said, it's an insurrection. It's not a riot. It's my people are pissed, basically. And it was just I realized you really have to come at it from a really open mind and see that there are two sides to any use of language. And that was a real education for me.
Great. So did you take any of that education? Some of those great individuals that you met, like Trevor and Lieutenant Canfield, were they influenced at all for writing your make-believe characters?
Yes, I think I haven't stolen directly from any of them, but there are little bits, I'm sure that, well, you probably realize too, when you're closing your eyes, or not closing your eyes, but when you're focused on your screen, you don't always know where the ideas come from or even where the voices come from. And so somewhere in my subconscious, I expect that I'm drawing on all of this stuff. It's a great apprenticeship.
Fair enough, yes. I was wondering, how was the transition from journalism to fiction writing? Journalism where you have to get every detail right, if you can't make a mistake. Fiction writing where you basically have to create every detail and make it sound believable. Is it a natural transition or was it difficult?
it was very slow for me. I think it was, I tended to over research, as I always did when I was writing, especially for a magazine. But then I realized, well, you do actually need a fair bit of research. I set Hero Haters in Aberdeen, Washington State, and in Pennsylvania. And I realized you have to root it in some reality, and then you start flying off the handle from there. So it took longer than I thought. And this is the Hero Haters. Why don't I just hold that up there? Is my third attempt. My first attempt was a finalist in the Crime Writers of Canada, unpublished in 2018, and it still sits on my hard drive here. Maybe someday it will live, but so it was a slow progress. I was used to pushing a button and having my work published. So now it's not exactly the instant gratification that I was used to, but does make it worthwhile when it finally comes out.
Well, I was visiting your website, kenmacqueen.com, looked up and saw some great testimonials that you got. What stuck out for me was Dietrich's Kaltis, last year's winner for Best Crime Writer, Best Novel, Crime Writers Canada. But also the big name that came out for me was Rick Mafina, I guess a fellow ex-journalist, now international bestseller author. How did a debut author like yourself pull off such great testimonials?
Well, this was the part that I really had to learn more than the writing part, was the marketing part, or the asking part for people. So I asked Rick, who I did know. We both worked at Southam at different times, although we never worked together. Rick was very generous. And Dietrich, of course, is an amazing, wonderful person and a fellow North Vancouverite. So he was most generous. I've been a huge fan of his books. His dialogue is fabulous. So he really reminds me of Elmore Leonard in a lot of ways.
Wow.
And so I was more than thrilled when he offered to blurb my book. I was also very lucky to get a blurb by Robert Degoni, who's an international bestseller, and that was a nice get as well. But there are other.
I'm not going to read all of them, but just to read Rick's because it's nice and short. Gripping from the first page, a thrill ride with all the right moves. I mean, coming from Rick Mafina, kudos to you.
He's a nice guy. He's very generous.
Yes. So anyone watching this show today, so we're recording this on October 3rd. If you want to get your hands on Ken's book, you don't have to wait much longer. It's debuting in 2 days, October 5th. And if you're in the Vancouver or North Vancouver region, maybe you can talk a little bit more about it, but you're having your book launch?
Yes, I'm having a book launch. Unfortunately, it's an invitation only because the space is limited, but it's at the new North Vancouver Museum, and it's a wonderful setting for anyone to go there. I'm hoping to do some other post-launch interviews and celebrations as well. I'd love to set something up at the libraries around here and see if I can do that at some point. This whole marketing thing is still a strange new beast for me.
But it's a fun beast.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, so I could definitely, I've seen you on social media a fair amount, so you're getting a hang of it, Ken. So it's a pleasure talking with you today. I guess I'll actually see you in a few days at your book launch, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm now an author, and you have just validated it by making me a pro. I appreciate that.
Thanks everyone for watching today. Again, if you want to see previous videos of ours, you can go to crimewritersofcanada.com. And then also if you want to learn more about Ken, kenmacqueen.com. Thanks again.
Thank you,
Bye.
Eric.